He is a professor of comparative politics, School of History, Philosophy, Political Sciences, and International Relations. Welcome to the show, Professor Jon Fraenkel from Victoria University. Evening, John. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Now, I've got you on because I've been having conversations over the weekend with people here in Dunedin. We use the STV voting block. And I wasn't aware until I just looked up today, actually, that there are fewer places using STV than I was aware of, but it is getting used for local body elections around the country. And I feel like there's some people are a little bit unclear about some of the options here. But before we jump into that, because you are someone who has looked at STV, how it's used in Ireland, I think you've studied how it was used in Malta. And if I'm correct, did you advise against it being used in Tonga, or have you read about how it was advised against being used in Tonga?
No, I published an article and worked with the Tongan Ministry of Justice back in 2008. I was an election observer at that election, and I also advised against the use of the single transferable vote, simply on the grounds of complexity. I'm not against its use in New Zealand in local government. It's just that in Tonga, they count the ballots using it's a very simple first past the post system, and they count them at the village level, and that creates a certain kind of confidence in the election. Everyone knows who's got votes, why they got votes. It's all done at a very local level. Whereas with the single transferable vote, you by definition have to aggregate the votes, because all single transferable vote always uses multi-member constituencies. When it's only got one member, as for example for the Maori ward here in Wellington, it's not called the single transferable vote, it's called the alternative vote system.
But is it still the single transferable vote process?
Well, no, not quite, because the single transferable vote process with only one member is the alternative vote.
Okay.
What I mean by that is that the threshold if you've only got one member is 50%. Anyone that gets over 50% gets elected. Anyone that doesn't get elected. There's no you can have elimination of candidates under the alternative vote, but you don't have one of the distinct features under the single transferable vote system, which is that if one member gets over the threshold, their extra votes are redistributed in accordance with second preferences. That doesn't happen with the alternative vote. It only happens with the single transferable vote system.
Gotcha. Do you think, I mean, if we're going to talk about how local body politics are being elected, do we need to cover off first past the post and the pros and cons of that? Or is that pretty clear with most people, the person with the most vote wins, full stop?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is the simple reality of first past the post. It's simple to vote. It's simple to count. The person with the most votes wins, but that can mean winning with less than a majority. Yeah. It can mean winning even if you're not the most broadly supported candidate. The single transferable vote system was introduced for local government elections in New Zealand because of a perception that first past the post wasn't delivering the best possible candidates. It's also used in Scotland in local government elections, and for the same sort of reason.
Do you think that perception is accurate, that it was delivering not the best possible candidates?
I mean, you'd have to ask a New Zealand specialist to comment on something like that.
Fair enough.
I'm an international specialist and a Pacific specialist. I wasn't around in New Zealand at the time when those debates were happening. I mean, there are discussions about the relative merits of these different systems. My concerns in Tonga were about the complexity of the system in that context, and about the confidence in the system when ballots are counted at the local level. That's not the case in New Zealand. There's no reason why one should use those kind of objections to object to the system being used in New Zealand.
Gotcha. For people, I mean, we are talking mostly about single transferable vote because, to be honest, this is a Dunedin-based program, although we go nationwide, well, internationally, obviously. But also first past the post seems to be pretty clear. You might get a winner with only 40 or 35% of the vote, but it seems pretty clear. The person with the biggest slice of the pie wins. Yeah. Single transferable vote, although it seems pretty clear, and this is actually an article from 2019, but it's got a lovely graphic, which I think explains it very nicely from the ODT, because we had it here in 2019, that you rank in order of preference your candidates. So in the example that we're looking at on the screen, Andy Apple got 1 vote, Wendy Watermelon got ranked second. I don't mean 1 vote, sorry, ranked first. Wendy Watermelon got ranked second. Barry Banana got ranked third. Susie Strawberry got ranked fourth, and so on and so on and so on. Which means, and you can probably explain this better than I, in the first round of voting, this is how I understand it. You correct me. If no one gets over 50%, the lowest score getter, the lowest person on the ballot gets dropped off. Their votes get redistributed, and then you go to the next round to see if someone gets over 50%. Is that basically how we find a conclusion?
Not quite, close, but not quite. The threshold for the alternative vote is 50% when you've only got one vacancy to be filled. With the single transferable vote, the threshold varies depending on the number of vacancies that you've got to get filled, and the number of voters. It's a formula called the Droop quota, which we don't need to go into, but gets calculated, that will tell you exactly. I don't know what it is in Dunedin or Wellington for that matter. It tells you exactly how many votes you need in order to cross that threshold. So if, say, Andy Apple, who's first on that ballot, say Andy Apple gets sufficient votes. Let's say the Droop quota is, say, 15% in order to get elected. If Andy Apple gets first preferences in 15% of the cases, he will be elected. If he gets first preference in 30% of cases, he'll use up the 15%, and then the extra 15% will go to other candidates, depending on who's listed second preference on the ballot paper.
Wow, it's actually sounds quite problematic. It sounds like difficult to understand. Because I mean, the way I've been thinking about it is, I'm not a huge Formula One fan, but it seems to be the example of what, when you have a season of racing, is that someone who finishes second in every race is likely to win the overall season, because maybe the person, 20 other people come first at various times, but if you finish consistently second overall, you're probably going to get enough points to win the season. And I mean, is that a fair sort of analogy for this, or do the first ranking votes carry more weight and make the first ranking votes to be more likely to determine who the winner is in the outcome?
Well, there is a Pacific country that does have a system like that now, tiny Nauru with only 10,000 people, and they value a first preference as one and a second preference as half. But no, that's not the case in New Zealand. Under the New Zealand system, every ballot is worth the same. And yes, it is possible for a candidate who gets very few first preferences to get elected largely on second preferences. In my experience, that's quite rare. Usually, some popular candidates get a lot of first preferences, and those surpluses are handed on to other candidates. So the best way to think about STV is that single transferable vote is that it involves candidates competing to get to a certain threshold, the Droop quota, say 15%, and the redistribution of surplus ballots to other candidates if they get over 15%, plus the knocking off of lowest polling candidates one by one until you fill all of the vacancies, which is usually 2 or 3.
It makes it such a different equation to think about. Now, you're saying Droop. Do you know how to spell it? D-R-U-P-E, D-R-O-O-P? Because I want to do some research on it.
D-R-O-O-P, the Droop quota.
The Droop quota. Because if it was like 20%, now I'm thinking statistically, or sorry, not statistically, but I guess critically or logically, if it was 20% and there was a popular mayoralty candidate, which there's only one position for, that I wanted to support, would that therefore mean giving someone else my first vote might make sense, because they're going to go beyond the Droop quota anyway if it was a small number?
Well, in Northern Ireland, sometimes people do try and ensure that a lot of their candidates get a lot of first preferences, because if you stack a lot of first preferences on one extremely popular candidate, it's possible that the other candidates get knocked out during the process of elimination. So sometimes people strategize around that.
Yeah, the strategy of how to vote. It's a strange thing to strategize around something that's a bit difficult to understand, or that we don't have the numbers to, i.e. the Droop quota. So how do you actually make a strategy for that is perplexing. One of the things that's going around the internet at the moment, and this is really what I want to be clear on from you or from anyone that can help us out with this. I had a conversation with someone in the weekend, and we were talking about not ranking people. So we're talking about Dunedin Mayor, right? That's as the example. There's 11 candidates for Dunedin Mayor. There's one position. And we were talking about, because there's a lot of feedback from people who are doing their own private research on people and saying, do not rate this person. In other words, leave them off the ballot altogether.
Mhm.
Yet I'm now hearing and reading in places like Stuff, and we'll have a look at some of those things later on tonight, that ranking them near the bottom, so actually the person you don't want to have get in, if there is one person or two people that you're particularly concerned about them getting in Dunedin, you would rank them at 10 or 11, and that would be more effective to keep that person out than leaving them off. Do you have any knowledge in this? Are you able to clear this up for us at all? Because I think that's quite an important thing for people's strategy.
Well, firstly, if you're talking about an election where there's only one vacancy to be filled, it may be that people are using the term single transferable vote to describe that. But as I mentioned earlier, the single member district version of the STV system is called the alternative vote, and the threshold will be 50%. Anyone that gets over 50% will get in. There's a crucial difference between these systems. In the northern and the southern hemisphere, except New Zealand is a bit different in that respect. In many parts of the world, particularly in the northern hemisphere, preferential voting systems are optional. In other parts of the world, preferential voting systems are compulsory. In other words, you have to rank order your candidates all the way down in order to cast a valid ballot. That was the case in Fiji in 99, 2001, 2006, and it still is the case in Papua New Guinea, where they have to rank 3 preferences. When you have a compulsory, and many Australian states also have preferential voting systems where you have to rank preferences or your ballot is considered invalid. Under those kind of circumstances, strategizing about exactly where you place your candidates becomes extremely important, and and a lot of people do proceed by putting their first preference first, and then the person that's most likely to beat their first preference last, and then filling ballots in the middle, a kind of negative ranking thing. That happens quite a lot in even in Nauru. You can see examples of that kind of thing happening. With an optional preferential voting system such as you have in New Zealand, you can rank 1, you can rank 1, 2, you can rank 1, 2, 3, you can rank 1, 2, 4, you can put a complete ranking. The lower preferences are very unlikely to come into play and are likely to make really only a marginal difference. So I think the best advice that could be given is to rank as many candidates as you have a genuine preference for, and don't rank the ones below that.
So let's say that I knew, I've been lucky, I've interviewed, or I am going to interview all 11 candidates. So I've had dealings with all of them, so I could probably make a decision of 11. But are you saying that, let's say after you get 5 or 6 down, because there's 11 candidates for only one position, that would involve, if I rank 6 down, that would involve having to get to the 6th round of trying to find 50.1% before those votes would be allocated to someone?
No. The number of rounds of the count is totally different to the number of candidates you rank on the ballot paper. It's highly probable that your lower order rankings will never come into the equation.
Yeah.
If your first preference or your second preference or your third preference are for the top supported candidates, those lower preferences will never be counted at all. There's no relationship between the number of counts and the number of
what I was asking was, if it got to the 6th round, like if still after 5 rounds you didn't have a 50% winner, let's put it another way. If I only ranked 2 people and after the second round it still wasn't 50%, what would happen with my other 9 people who I haven't ranked? Like, would they get any benefit from not ranking them, seeing I've only ranked 2 and left the other 9 blank, if after the first couple of rounds we're still not at 50%? So in other words, all my votes are done after choice 1, choice 2. Does it matter after that, or could you just does it not make any preference or benefit for either getting people in or not getting people in to not rank, if the vote is still going on?
Your ballot will not be counted until the second preferences on your ballot will not be counted until the first preference shown on your ballot is eliminated. So if your first preference was for Andy Apple in the example you showed before, and then Andy Apple at some stage ends up with the lowest tally of ballots, he will be eliminated, and your ballot will go to Wendy Watermelon, who's your second preference there. And if Wendy watermelon gets eliminated, it'll go to Barry Banana, and so on. It works. Your ballot, the people and the counting agents will only start looking at your ballot for second preferences once your first preference is eliminated. Now, just to give you an example, of the way lower order preferences can make a major difference.
Please.
I've studied in a lot of detail because it was politically very important. The Fiji election of 1999. In the Fiji election of 1999, there were two sort of large parties, the Rambukan Party, the coup leader, and the Fiji Labour Party. And a lot of people who supported the Fiji, Rambuka's party put the Fiji Labour Party last, and vice versa. And a lot of the ballots, because those were the two main contenders, where one was eliminated, it was the one that was second last that got the ballot, and vice versa. Right? Wow. So that can lead to all sorts of kind of weird results where I didn't want that person at all. I put them second to last. But if you put the biggest supported two candidates last and second last, your ballots will go to the second to last ranked candidate. It's one of the weird things about that system.
Okay, but so we're clear. Because like in Dunedin, and I won't say who they are because I don't want to influence around, there's basically 4 people who are likely candidates for mayor out of the 11.
Yes.
Really, because there's 4 of them that needing to get 50%, it's unlikely that any 4 of those will be eliminated before the lower ranked people, the other 7. So actually, if your first rank gets allocated after they get eliminated, if you're voting for one of those 4, and I think obviously most people are, I'm not trying to tell them what to do, it's unlikely that your vote is going to get eliminated because they're likely to be there at the end because they're going to be the most popular 4.
Yeah. So you may have a preference for those 3 candidates that are not likely to get elected, but what really matters when you cast your vote is the order in which you place those 4 candidates that are likely to be elected, and your vote is highly likely to be your fourth preference. So ignoring the 3 that are unlikely to get elected, the one you place fourth is likely to get your ballot first, and then if they're eliminated, the next one.
So that would therefore mean if someone, let's say of those 4 people, if someone didn't want the 4th person to get in, then they should rank them down at 6, 7, 8, or 9.
Yes, or not rank them at all. And I mean,
not at all.
That's unlikely to make a major difference. I mean, there are some people who would suggest you should rank down to the very last one and leave the last one unranked. There are others that would suggest that you should rank all the way down. But I don't know about you. I mean, you say you have got a preference for all 7 candidates in this election. I've never been in an election where I could rank all of the candidates personally.
No, I don't know if I have a preference for them all, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm probably one of the few people in Dunedin who's managed to spend an hour and a half with all 11 candidates. So probably, maybe almost apart from anybody else, I've probably spoken to more of them for more hours than anyone else in Dunedin. Perhaps. Okay. So that kind of brings us back to that original question of rank them last or don't rank them at all. In practicality, doesn't make a huge difference.
No, I don't think makes a huge difference. What's important is the order in which you place the leading candidates, meaning by the leading candidates, the candidates that are most likely to get the largest share of the vote. And most people who are interested in elections know, in a national election, we all know the Labour candidate, the national candidate is likely to get the largest share of the votes in many constituencies. Those would, if you were using STV at the national level, those would be the key parties to consider where you place them. Of course, at the local government elections, it's more individual centred rather than party centred.
Do you personally have a preference for first past the post or STV when it comes to New Zealand local body elections? Like, do you look around and think this would be better or this is better?
I don't think STV has been a failure for New Zealand. It's a sophisticated voting system that allows for expression of a greater degree of voter choice. People also like STV because there are less wasted votes. With first past the post, if what counts is the votes for the top candidate, and everyone else's vote is sort of wasted. Whereas STV is a proportional system. It works out, it's a very individual candidate centered system, but it is a proportional system. So it ensures that the various parties are represented more or less in proportion to their share in the vote. There are advantages to that kind of system.
Very good. From the School of History, Philosophy, Political Science and International Relations from Victoria University, Professor Jon Fraenkel. Jon, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your thoughts on that and helping us try and figure this whole thing out.
Pleasure. You could, if you want, you can add in a logo with a droop quota. I didn't want to try
the droop quota, though, but what you're saying is for the mayoralty, it's basically 50.1%. That's the number, yeah, for the mayoralty, because it's one position.
I'm unfamiliar with this. In fact, I didn't realise that you were talking from Dunedin, because I just quickly mugged up on the constituency size in Wellington, thinking that that's where you were talking about. But it's four 3-member constituencies, 1 2-member constituency, and 1 1-member constituency. So, in my view, that 1-member constituency would be run according to the alternative vote, in the way that electoral specialists explain it.
Yeah. Very good. Hey, look, thank you so much. This has been very helpful, and I'm sure it's been helpful to the audience as well.
Pleasure.